Thank you, Lynn. When I was sitting there, I couldn't help but notice also on that rack of books the corpse dream of N. Petkoff, and my temptation maybe is simply to read to you from that. The justification for that being that on the very last page of St. Patrick's Day, there is in bold print, from Dublin to Bulgaria. And underneath it, there is a check made out to Lilia McGonigle for £500,000 by the Irish poet Derek Mahon. Because what had happened, Lilia had come down with appendicitis, and she had to have her appendix removed on the eve of our departure to America. The check actually exists, and I've pasted it into the front of Derek Mahon's book, because I think the check itself is probably worth more than Derek's bank account. But the corpse dream of N. Petkoff has this Irish connection, and I'll only note that I'll read you the opening sentence, but also the little note that's connected to it. You might think about the corpse dream of N. Petkoff, and the opening line is, I, Nicola Petkoff, was hanged by the neck and was dead, slowly as they expected, on 23 September 1947. A poor job of it in the eyes of some, though in their eyes, well done, the life of him squeezed out, pulled out, gasped out, one after the other, for 3, after 4 minutes, and the life is still. But the origin of this book is noted in a note on the copyright page. The spark for this prose came from Michael O'Riordan, head of the Communist Party of Ireland, who gave me in 1968 the book Dimitrov Wastes No Bullets by Michael Pedev, saying, "This is the only book in my library from Bulgaria." Dimitrov, you might remember, was the hero of the Reichstag fire trial in Germany, and then he became head of the Comintern. And then after World War II, he was head of Bulgaria. He was installed as the leader of Bulgaria by the communists, and that was his sentence about the main opponent of his rule. I guess that's an introduction in some way to St. Patrick's Day, another day in Dublin. I owe the subtitle of the book to my wife, and she, much like Joyce's wife, has stuck, because remember Nora her last name was Barnacle. And she says, oh, another book about Dublin. And then she refined it by saying another day in Dublin. And so I wanted to read to you little bits from the book. The book starts in a place that's torn down, and it ends up in a place that's torn down. So the only remains of those two places are in this book. And so it starts very simply, come hear something, read some things I was saying. That spring I was staying at the Russell Hotel in the cheapest, or as I have been taught to say, the most reasonable available room. I have sat before the fire in the lobby, cold glass of Carlsberg in hand, realizing, traveling out, the patrimony in the gift in my case, from all the years of my father's fear of doing anything which would endanger his retirement. After 49 years of work at the American Can Company, he survived 2 years of doing, as he put it, nothing. Died, he did, alone in a parking lot with strangers looking on at his performance. Upstairs, built into the cabinet next to the bed, was a radio, which received only Radio Aaron. Stories always seemed to begin in 18, they, he, she, and the words flowed into never remembering a fact, except the pause before the announcer saying a birthday greeting to someone's granny of county who wanted to hear apples and oranges, as performed by the Metropole Dance Band, and then the female announcer would say 3 or 4 words in Irish, allowing me to remember this announcer, Ruth Buchanan, who had taught English to foreign students in the same school where I would work in Baggot Street when I had lived in this city with the Bulgarian. This Ruth, who could also still be seen in cinema adverts plucking a little shampoo bottle growing in the center of flowers, then blooming down there in Stephen's Green. This Ruth, who is now saying 3 or 4 languages in Irish every hour, reminding people there are 2 languages in this country, and for me, one of those languages drowned in the ocean, across which my grandfather, at the age of 12, was shipped from Donegal to New York, where the Bulgarian lived. But let's not go into all of that just yet. Down there in the street, troops of high school bullies have been formed up to strut and twirl and shake their behinds for all they're worth. St. Patrick's Day in Dublin, imported from New York and points west, them showing them how it's done, bands and marching units in between flatbed trucks on which shivering girls stand throwing sample packets of dried peas and frozen fish fingers. Looking down from my window, I couldn't tell whether this was the end or the beginning of the parade. Then I thought to tell you about Justin. Because the day precedes, actually, I give a little handy introduction that you will march yourself through Dublin, and I didn't want anyone to go astray. And there is a nice handy, service announcement, as I call it. But I thought to tell you about some of the people that appear in the book. And Justin died in September as I received a letter, found neglected in his room. I met him several times in the summer when I asked him down to the Gory Festival. He said he couldn't risk losing his busking spot in Stephen's Green. James Liddy in a letter. 15 years it took him. Having come home from work, there was a letter, saved until back on the street to read walking along. Found neglected, in other words, died, last September in his room in Dublin. A shudder never felt before. Why for him, the second friend to die? My getting older, another birthday. If I was to call Lilia and tell her I just got a letter about how Justin died, you remember him, but she wouldn't, and would say, as she had of another friend, Charles, he did what he wanted to do, but she wouldn't remember Justin because the year she was in Dublin, she wasn't speaking English that well and wasn't drinking, and those were the only occasions for meeting Justin, then just back from Romania after something happened. He wasn't saying, and was, as he was having it, trying to get on as best he could, for his clothes were still good, and French people were just beginning to come to Dublin in large numbers, and Justin knew where all the parties were, where only men went. And that's what the French men were looking for, and how interested they all were in him. Then trying and sure, just maybe things would. And I allowed my American optimism to forget Ireland was a small country. You get one shot at it, not like in the United States, with all them moving on. Grandmothers in their 70s going back to university for master's degrees. Justin had his shot and something happened. He'd come into the New Amsterdam Cafe on South Ann Street and sat with the French or Spanish au pair girls. Remember, I was friendly with Marie-José Medel Legras from Reunion, who talked in French with Justin, who had read all 3 volumes of Sartre's Roads to Freedom, then banned in Ireland. I had read them that Easter in London, and she liked Justin for his manners, so unlike all the Irish. He smoked French cigarettes and had just passed a test for the tourist board. A couple of years later, when I was married to the Bulgarian, he told me he had been in Romania on some sort of tourist board business, but it hadn't been pleasant, and Lilia wasn't having him over to the bedsit on Grosvenor Square because he looked like the sort who, not drinking, she didn't like, which he later told me was his only pleasure after working the penny whistle to get the money for the stuff, and someone said Justin goes with boys to the Green Cinema, I thought at least that, for only twice was I ever invited into someone's home in Ireland, because there is a terrible privacy in the land, so wherever, like damp logs rubbing against each other. One afternoon I had walked by him, not recognizing him, and then him shouting, and I turned, Justin, just after the pubs had opened in the afternoon, starting toward Toner's, but he wasn't allowed in. He hadn't been able to wait to get to the toilet, so went in the corner. Happens to the best of us. So he went around the corner where he was allowed during the early evening, before all the people came in, and would have to be going. He bought me a pint, insisted on it, and then I bought him one. And how's it going? Not so well. Where are you living? I have a room. My father won't see me. I won't see him. He doesn't want anything to do with me. Justin didn't have any front teeth. He was dirty. His clothes were soiled and ripped. I couldn't look into his mouth. There was a brownish gook caked on his lips. His fingers were nicotined yellow. He asked about the large American woman, Mary. I hadn't seen her in 6 or 7 years. He asked about the East German Dietrich, with 3 passports, who had disappeared. We talked about art, who taught history in America. We talked about Stanley, who smashed a man's head through a door at Gertrude's and Alice's for making fun of his accent. We had a couple of more pints, and it was time to be going, because it was time to be going with nothing more to talk about, as the future was not in our vocabulary, and I knew something terrible was going wrong and had gone wrong, and now, when I look back, something was awful with my own life, but Justin was going to the dogs on the express, and I was still on the local. And then a portrait of a woman who appears in the book. And she's talking here, and you just pick it up. I don't mind being on my own, Barbara says. I like my own company. Some nights, when he, that means her husband, is at the paper, I am almost angry, or maybe disappointed is a better word, when he comes home. We live very much our own lives. I like it here by myself reading. The candles are lit and it is reassuring, and I am just here by myself. It's not that I dislike people. I have many friends at work, and I see them, and I go out with them, go to the theater and have a good time, but I just like being here by myself. Do you know the story in Dubliners, A Painful Case? It is my favorite story. I guess it says a lot about me, or about what I know about my family's life. The night goes on. She is talking about having a real job, finally, and a real job is and was working in the government services, like back when your friend Donahue had one. They even give you time off of exams at the university if you decide to go to university. A real job. And they had a moment a few years ago when they took in older women. Once you couldn't have a government position if you were a married woman. It would be seen as taking a job away from a man who really needed it to support a family. She is saying her bottle of wine for dinner is very important on Sunday. Will you come over here with Nuala for dinner? I like to cook. It won't be a bother. I'm sure it'll be okay. I just have to ask Nuala. Barbara went to the National School and then Wesley College. She remembers as a little child holding onto the pram, and it's in the rain, and then climbing into the pram with her baby sister, where her baby sister was. Her mother walked them about but drove her out of the pram. She felt awful being pushed out of the pram. Her mother had raincoats for all of them. Her mother thought it was good for them all to go walking in the rain. A story, and it is getting late. When Barbara's father was in his early 30s and then assistant bank manager, I think that is why I had always liked The Painful Case. His mother asked him if he didn't think it was time to be getting married. Of course, he was still living at home. That goes without saying. What about the bridge club? For many years, he had been going to a bridge club on Tuesday evenings. He had noticed someone there, and he right away wrote to this woman and asked her if she would marry him. She wrote back that she would need time to think about it. A month later, mind you, in the meantime, they had seen each other at the weekly bridge club meetings. He wrote again asking if she would marry him. At the next bridge club meeting, she said, I suppose. They stepped out together for a year and were married. In time, Jonathan was born, and when I was born, the pregnancy and delivery were very difficult. They decided they would get a girl from down in the country to help out. They put an ad in the paper down there. They hired Mary. They thought she was 14. You remember, this was back before people had their au pairs sitting at the dinner table with the family. My mother and father ate their dinner in the dining room, and Mary would eat her dinner in the kitchen by herself. 2 years later, someone told my father that he should get some sort of insurance for Mary since she was now 16. That's when they found out that she was now only 14, so they had hired her when she was 12. And that is why I don't find it strange that you say your grandparents were sent off to America when they were 12. That was back then, when there was no such thing as a teenager. My mother did decide to call in at the St. Vincent de Paul Society because they thought Mary should have some sort of social life. And you know, my parents, being Protestant, didn't want to interfere since obviously Mary was Catholic. The St. Vincent de Paul Society only had activities for boys or for girls alone. Anyway, as things turned out, Mary did meet another girl in circumstances similar to her own who lived in a house down the street. They started to go out on their day off, and Mary met a soldier from the Rathmines barracks, and she found herself pregnant. My father went to the barracks, and a marriage was arranged at the church of the three patrons, the church on Rathgar Road you asked about. On the day of the wedding, the soldier didn't turn up, and Mary was left at the altar. My father went back to the barracks and explained the situation. The commandant had the soldier called in and had him escorted by a detachment of soldiers to the church, and you could say that he was married at the point of many rifles. The last of Mary, I heard only that she was living down in the country and had 2 or 3 children. I don't know anything more about her. Driving me home is not that far to Nuala's house along the military road, and suddenly realized how late it was. Nuala is asleep, so no one to talk with. And then a more romantic piece about another woman. I was living in a room on the top floor of a commercial building in Eustace Street, just up from the Liffey on the south side of Dublin. To the west of me, Swift went mad, and his manservant Patrick charged a penny each so the mob could come in and watch the Dean in the midst of his convulsions. To the east of me, Trinity College sits as a stopper to the bottle made of Dame Street. Sad-eyed English girls sit in the buttery, eating yogurt, sliced apples, and cheese. They speak softly, and it is said on a whim, will come to your room for no other reason than a whim, and that is the worst of all, for if it were more than a whim, it would be bearable. And the line is, would you have breakfast with me? Which seems, if you don't mind me saying it, to counterpoint the screams I imagine in the night coming from Dublin Castle, where books with the lists of informers going back 300 years are still under seal, as a fear remains on the land. Not far away they tore Robert Emmet apart and fed his heart to the dogs. When I walked home from the pubs, I would see a couple leaning in the doorways. They rubbed against each other like large, damp logs. And it's always good to quote oneself within the same book. I knew a lot about history that year, for there was no person to be with and with whom I wished to live the future. I walked and read and drank and was able to say hello to a number of people in the pubs. Nigerians with the promise of a Mercedes when they went home to Lagos, an East German who did something with diamonds and physics, Marina to whom I taught English, a Norwegian business student who was in love with a Greek girl who sat at home mostly and watched in the mirror the acne on her face, an English girl who came to my room on the whim and lay awake all night as she had not been able to sleep well since as a child and living in Malta with her parents, where her father was an officer in the British Navy. She had seen her twin sister killed by lightning during a storm in the middle of summer. Susan, with her black hair dyed away from its original dirty blonde color. And I remember that she carried a copy of de Beauvoir's The Mandarins and put herself into St. Patrick's for a month with the nerves. And when she came out, her hair had begun to thin, but not enough to prevent her from working as an extra with the rest of us from the pubs during the making of the film Darling Lily. We sat in the Gaiety Theatre and watched Julie Andrews sing To the Heart of Rock Hudson. Between takes, she passed a bottle, and it seemed that as the day wore on, we clapped louder and were not asked back a second day. Susan, I saw her only one night alone, and that had been because she needed a place to be while the landlady had her room painted in the house out in Rathgar. We have talked many times since. Then one day I was told she had gone back to her parents' home in Plymouth. She sat in a large room reading Parry Match, waiting for a child to be born of a father not named. Eustace Street is noisy in the day when I walked home at night, only my footsteps walked with me, and even the couple seemed to have vanished. Susan, the remains were buried under no stone. You think of going to Holland, the lightning over Malta is not something to be thought pretty, and walked home one afternoon in the sunlight, past the horse-drawn carts and the men tearing up the street. A large aluminum kettle is upon the coals for the tea. In the pub at the corner in the back room, I drank stout and thought of Susan, who was then history. Not far away from me, the Messiah was first performed. I have seen my place on earth, possibly under a jar of Guinness, and sure there awaited the fate of flying to Copenhagen for Christmas. For didn't Danes all have blonde hair like Melinda's? The youth hostel in Copenhagen was closed, and people were about their duty of being happy. On the 23rd of December, I set out hitchhiking to Germany, made it to Kolding on Jutland. In the supermarket, I bought what I thought was a jar of peanut butter. It was mustard. Another boy was in the dorm. We talked of the cold and the gray sky that cloaked everything. Even the blonde faces were like newspaper. On the road for the eve of Christmas, very few rides. Walked across the border to Flensburg, stayed at the youth hostel, myself the only guest in a place for 500. I felt like those in the Catholic worker who rent a place in the municipal shelter to do penance for being alive. I had a couple of oranges from the machine, 2 bottles of Coke. I stayed awake all night reading Fitzgerald's The Beautiful and the Damned. A chained dog outside my window howled at the wind. A pint and sat against the dark wall, middle section of the pub. Dusty, empty whiskey bottles, and luckily could not see my own face on the whiskey mirror. Of course, Susan didn't come in that night. She lived in a basement flat and had the child because an abortion was too much of a hassle. Finally, something had taken root in her body. She was willing to meet Dickie and me at the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. I thought it was Hagia Sophia I was saying to test her, and she was saying, there, you see, we would have all gone too and waited for each other in the wrong place. And then I have a portrait of a male, and then there is a story, and you should be laughing when I get to reading the story. But for now, I want to tell you about Mr. J. We're sitting in this pub, Grogan's. Mr. J had erected himself and is Mr. J has erected himself and is waving arm, calling for the eye of the barman who was not looking his way until Mr. J musters all the force of the voice of the man born a couple of streets away from the slum where Edmund Burke first saw light of day, and Mr. J's continued education in either Oxford or Cambridge, whichever one it was, mightily unsuited him for this place. That bench from which he has arisen, damp stained where he was sitting, is evidence of how much he had been thinking during the day. And what were his words? We are waiting, and so is Mr. J, for the words to come from the wherever they go, deep in the innards of a man. I am a lapsed heretic. Get me a whiskey and make it a double. Mr. J's body wobbles under the gray cloud of smoke, and the loudness of the people is all in our ears. It is no laughing matter or smiling matter. But what can we expect, as if we have ever expected anything from these citizens of the New World? A bastard civilization gone to earth in only 100 or so years. A cursed civilization. A whiskey! A whiskey! And you have infected the good workmen of Dublin with your slovenly habits, all of them carrying in their pockets the promise of a job in the sewer bars of your New York, where no one is ever known to smile or have a kind word for the poet or a man of words. Okay. Then one. I work at the pint. Williams is handing the check to Tommy, who says, pleased to be able to help you in any way possible, seeing you come in with such a handy, heady reference, pointing to Teresa. Mr. J has turned his face to the wall and is quiet. He is listening to a lecture. I cannot make out whether the discourse is on philosophy or medieval painting. John's eyes are closed, and alas, poor John still has hours to go, as his friend who works on the buses is leaning over and trying to get some response by talking into his ear. John is not having any personal relations at the moment. He is improving the irritation in the brain. The friend is insistent. John's shoulder shrinks from the touch of the man and then shakes itself back at the young man still in the uniform of his calling into the life of collecting fares and giving change, and no abuse back to the abuse received from the irate Dubliners, so free with it these days, not realizing they are contributing to the making of a saint. With the years of their lives, they would see in all the bookshops of the Republic a journey of this man's soul from the number 14 to the number 15 bus. And here he is talking to, alas, poor John, who has turned his head and looks up with uncomprehending eyes at the object of his infection. Yes, he has said his infection, called affection. Yes, he is touching, Lydia is saying to Jocelyn. See how love makes its way through this cluttered earth on which you have to share the road with so many slugs who don't realize their calling is under a stone. Slugs, all of them. And on the road, all trying to be poets and failing. They're off to their advertising jungle to hustle any organ of delight that might have some value on the bed of the marketplace. And a bed not available, any doorway, please, will do. Large, damp logs rubbing together. Third time I've repeated this. If I may quote myself, I say, you may be less scabrous if I can make a request. Liddy says, give us more nature and less of the human. There are one and the same, I say, while Liddy is turning away, not interested in hearing what I have to say because it's not part of the bargain. John's bus conductor is squeezed in next to him, and they are holding hands. They are both afraid. It is days before payday, and John's money is at an end, and he wants to get at an end, as Mr. J just wanted to get to an end, and any sort of end would do. And then the concluding little bit, people end up at a place called the Corn Exchange, which does not exist anymore, and this was an office building that was turned into apartments. And we'll join, the whole gang of the book arrives at this place. And some St. Patrick's Day, Marie says. It is, Art says. In Milwaukee, James Liddy says, St. Patrick's Day begins on February 15th. This one will end in Dublin in a week, as we have been modernized. In a haze of drink, the story was told or wasn't told, and I have it all in memory, since it has to be told as the second bottle of gin was making its way about the room, because it was Anthony Burgess, right around the corner in Trinity, telling us the story by James Joyce when speaking on the topic of the sexuality of Ulysses inside the walls of the surly fronted, since Eugene had met Burgess in the York Minster in London, when he would be standing there with his 2 empty suitcases, having disposed of his review copies, waiting to take the train back to the first wife, who was dissolving her liver with gin, and Burgess liked to tell James Joyce's favorite story. Where's the story? Stan says. Yes, where's the story? Liddy says. Judith nods her head, and I begin by saying. there was this man in prison. Nice beginning. And he wanted to get out, naturally. So he started to bang his hands against the wall. Had he been gang raped yet? I don't know. This wasn't a French prison, as only in France do they have great gang rape poems. Something about the French asshole or arsehole. The guy is banging his hands against the wall. The palms of his hands develop sores. So you can see, if you were reading the story, it doesn't work as well. As if you were hearing it for the first time as Burgess was telling it to Eugene. And with the sores, he cut his way through the bars of the window. You have a whole theory of architecture, Art said. Might be interesting to discuss what sort of room your man is in by the evidence that he could cut his way through the bars, along with the idea of how would his body then fit through the window. Must have been very thin. These prawns are good. These prawns are good. These prawns are good. Art, Stan, Brian, Elizabeth, myself, Judith, the Marine, another Marine, Susan, Teresa, Liddy, Liam, Finton, Leland, and others, even not mentioned by name, were heard from. So the guy has cut his way through the bars and has had the foresight to knot together the sheets, which for some reason has been able to accumulate. A certain flaw in the story, as I should have started back when he was accumulating the sheets. However, he's knotted the sheets together and tucked one sheet under his arm. Or, hold on for a second. He's knotted the sheets together and gotten himself down to the ground. You are holding. He could have untied the last sheet and used it, or used the one under his arm. Judith, could you pour me a neat gin as my whistle needs wetting? Your man now has a sheet in his hand and proceeds to rip it in half. And what do you make with your man now holding two halves, and through that he got himself through the wall of the prison? I know the answer, Finton says. What's the donut built around? Right. And your man is out on the moor, because all prisons are built on moors. Damp, wind-swept places, and your man is cold and wet and in fear of catching pneumonia. My own father almost died of it, as I heard since childhood. What a killer disease it is, and on top of this, I don't want to lose my hair, which happened to my father. From the fog, he took a blanket. A pause for a sip. You see what Burgess was getting at? Vaguely, Liddy says. Not so loud as you'll waken Mr. J, Liam says. Vagueness is his favorite color. So your man makes his way to the convenient tool shed on the edge of the moor, but here's the posse on his trail. And suddenly, at all four sides, and this ain't no Lone Ranger Tonto story, he looks around in desperation, and his eye passes over the hammers, the axes, the screwdrivers. Whenever one tells this story, there is always a hesitation if a girl is present when mentioning screwdrivers, so it might be better to mention chisels. The men attached to the dogs are closing in, and your man at last sees the plane. And so farewell to his pursuers, he is off. Like a shot, I sometimes add, if I can use a cliché, a must for keeping my hand in the business. And your man is walking in Paris, France. The French have more practice in providing background for people on the run, and escaping this and that. A little Rilke, Hemingway, high contrast photographs of blonde hair on the back of the neck of a naked blonde woman turned away. Forget it. Your man is one day walking along the Rue Vanu. Where? You don't really need this detail, the street name, or the fact Julian Green lives there. When he discovers he is being followed, they are on to him. When does the story end? An objection to the length has been noted. So, he walks faster, and they walk faster. And faster they walk, the faster he walks. And eventually he finds himself in a cul-de-sac. And no, there is not going to be a play upon the word cool, even though I did introduce that blind lemon of Genet, and just as those pursuing feet reached the other end of the cul-de-sac from where he is standing, no escaping, but our hero sees a door, and suddenly a woman appears. He noted the door had closed behind her, and there was no key to be found, and those footsteps were approaching almost to the whites of their eyes, when out of the blue he noticed a ladder of the stocking of the lady, and he climbs up the ladder, and has not been heard from since. There is silence in the room. The pin falls off the counter. And then, Stan asks. Yes. And then Liam says, same for me, Liddy says. I want to know what happened when he got back into the womb, Judith says, probably complaining about the furniture. Where's the imagination, Susan asks. How did Susan get into the room? And the theft, my dear, Liddy says. Don't you dear me. Theft is a way of life for any artist. That's why I loathe them, Susan says. Morality, Mr. J quotes, having awakened at Susan's English accent, is furnished to the world by the Anglo-Saxons with their bathtubs and wash basins, of people who have only one original spiritual activity, to wash themselves. And thank you very much.